All right, guys, it is time for another installment of my horror stories in nursing. These are horror stories that happened while I was a nurse, while I was on the unit, that I witnessed myself. And just like last time, not everyone really has a bad outcome. These are just terrible stories or things that happen while I was a nurse. Now, just like the first story that I told, in this story, there's no blood, there's no guts, there's no gore, and everyone survives and has a good outcome. Let me set the stage for you. It's roughly an hour past shift change. The unit that I was on, you had 6 patients as a nurse, and you had to check on them every single hour. A documented check-in. You typically check things like pain level, comfort level, sites such as IV sites or PICC line sites or feeding tube sites, whatever it may be. You had 6 patients. Typically, you didn't have a hard time getting to every patient in that hour. So, we're about an hour after shift change. Shift change happens at 6. And when shift change happens, the going off nurse reports to the coming on nurse. And that could take roughly an hour. So, at the end of shift change, the nurse coming on then does a quick round and checks all the patients and then gets all the meds and things like that. So, the reporting off nurse gives a good report, says everybody does fine, nothing going wrong whatsoever. The coming on nurse, the reporting on nurse, comes on the unit, and it was actually, of course it had to have been her last patient that she was seeing before going back to her first patient. So an entire hour was over with. So upon coming in the last patient's room, this nurse sort of does her quick checks, a head to toe assessment really quickly, and notices that the IV site, and it was not a PICC line, it was an IV site, was above the elbow. Normally, typically, anything above the elbow is typically a PICC line or an A line. This was an IV site up high above the elbow. Not common, but does happen. And then begins to look at it. And when she looks at it, it looks really scary. She's got a big infiltration. The worst part is the pump should have noticed the change in pressure and set off. Our pumps on that particular unit played hot cross buns. You heard hot cross buns in your nightmares. Typically a machine, if you looked at it funny, went off and played hot cross buns. These machines were so sensitive that we hated them. We truly hated these machines, and they would alarm over anything. So the fact that this pump did not alarm to realize that there was a change in pressure, and this individual's arm is now like a bingo arm. It honestly looked like a water bed. Anybody who's old enough to remember water beds, it looks like a water bed. I believe it was almost an entire bag of fluid was sort of here-ish. The nurse hits the RAT button, RRT, we called it the RAT button, and it basically stood for Rapid Response Team. So you got like a doctor, the charge nurse on the unit, the respiratory team, phlebotomy showed up, EKG showed up. A lot of people showed up when you called a RAT call, RRT. And I came along with the RAT team, RRT team, came along. So I wasn't actually there when the initial discovery had happened. Show up, and the doctor's like, "Oh, this is bad. This doesn't look good." And I don't remember the medication that was actually running at the time, but I do remember that the doctor said, if we leave this is very toxic to that particular tissue and could cause necrosis. Great. So you mean to tell me that we have to figure out how to get all of this fluid out of this bingo arm full of tissue mass right here? That I did feel it at the time, and it was weird feeling. It was very weird feeling. We got to get all that out. And the doctor says, yeah, we got to get all of that fluid out. And here's how we're going to do it. And the doctor presents to us the idea of, let's just say 15 TB style syringes, so very small, 15 of these full of something else. Again, I don't remember what it was, but we're going to jab this individual roughly 15 times with TB syringes in this mass that is now hanging on the bottom of their arm. And I got to be part of that. And the individual was confused. It was nighttime because I was night shift, so it was getting dark. I believe it was already dark because it was wintertime. And anybody who knows anything about being confused in the nighttime knows that they turn into werewolves. Sundowning's real. And this individual became combative. Understandably so. They probably feel like they're getting bee stung 15 different times, right in roughly the same area. So we had a good outcome. We did have to end up restraining the patient in order to get everything to happen. Some of us held down the individual. Some of us did some sticking. I did a little bit of both due to the angle that I was at. It was a terrible, terrible situation. Now, you say, well, Chris, where's the nightmare part of this? Where's the terrible part of this? Well, one, the terrible part of this is it appears that the going off nurse, the reporting off nurse, did not do her final checks. And she did not eyeball the patient head to toe that last hour as you're supposed to do, and did not see that IV site as you are supposed to do. Had the IV site been seen within that hour, probably wouldn't have had an entire bag of fluid underneath their arm. That's mistake number one. Issue number two, not really a mistake, but a mechanical issue, is the fact that the pump did not go off. Now, typically pumps, like I said, are very sensitive and go off on any change of pressure whatsoever and play hot cross buns, and they're very aggravating. This one, however, kept running. Now, if I was to gravity feed fluid into someone, there's no pump. It's just me sort of twisting that little knob to change the flow rate. This was a pump. So the fact that the pump failed and was allowed to fail for this long without alarming is a big issue. And I remember Biomed came up for this one because we were like, you got to do something with this pump, because that is a very big hazard. Something went wrong with this pump, and it's a terrible situation. Number three, the worst thing about well, not the worst thing, those are the worst things about it. How we had to do it was no fun. Think about it. You're a confused individual. You're in an unfamiliar place. You probably don't feel well, because chances are you're in the hospital, you don't feel good. And then three, you have 5 to 6 individuals in there stabbing you 15-ish times with little bitty needles in the underside of your arm, which is probably really sore due to the bag of fluid that's in it. It was not fun, but it happened. Multiple failures led to this. I'm glad that the nurse coming on did her assessment and did catch this, as it could have gone all night had that nurse not done her, assessments and checks. But it didn't go all night. It did go a little bit of time, but it could have been worse. It was still no fun, and I know that everyone involved was like, ooh, we really probably need to look at policy change on this, for the pump and for the checks and things like that. So, as I said, everybody did turn out well. The patient did survive. The patient had a full recovery, and everyone else kept their jobs, actually. I believe somebody did get written up, but it wasn't too bad. Another horror stories from nursing. Hope it helps. Thank you much.